The sun dipped below the ragged silhouettes of Hemlock Ridge, flooding the sky with molten coral and bruised purple. On the banks of Silver Pine Creek, a group of 5 college friends, Avery, Marcus, Elena, Wyatt, and Zoe, unloaded backpacks from the back of their dusty SUV. They'd driven 4 hours from campus for a weekend of fishing, stargazing, and escape from fluorescent lecture halls. As they pitched tents on the creek's sandy floodplain, the air hummed with crickets and the distant call of barred owls settling into the pines. Avery, the unofficial trip leader and self-styled wilderness expert, consulted a creased paper map. "We're here," she said, tapping a smudge-stained P marking the primitive campsite. Elena unrolled a plaid blanket while Zoe fetched water from the creek in battered Nalgene bottles. Marcus hefted firewood, birch logs peeled to pale ivory, and Wyatt rummaged through the cooler for marshmallows and chocolate bars. The last golden rays of daylight danced on the water, igniting ripples like a scattering of sparks. As twilight deepened to indigo, fireflies emerged in lazy flutters, and the first stars pricked the evening sky. The group built a crackling campfire, its polished black embers popping as Zoe coaxed flames with dry twigs. Marcus strung a lantern from a low branch, its yellow glow haloing their circle. They passed around sandwiches and sipped lukewarm cider, sharing ghost stories and laughter that echoed through the surrounding stand of towering pines. But the creek's gentle murmur hid a growing undertow of unease. Elena shivered, pulling her jacket tighter. "Did anyone else hear that?" she asked. A low, hollow rustle drifted through the trees, softer than thunder but too deep for wind. Avery paused mid-slice of bread. "Probably just raccoons," she asserted, though she sounded unsure. Across the fire, Wyatt's brows knit as he stared into the blackness beyond the lantern's reach. Night closed in like a velvet curtain. The friends extinguished the lantern, wanting an unobstructed view of the Milky Way. Above them, constellations shimmered with crystalline clarity: Ursa Major, Orion's Belt, the Great Square of Pegasus. It was the wilderness they'd hoped for. Absolute darkness pierced only by starlight, with no city glow to pollute the heavens. They settled into sleeping bags around embers that still glowed faintly, content in their small circle of warmth. At around midnight, Zoe's sudden gasp split the calm. She pointed toward the tree line, voice barely above a whisper. "Guys, the path markers, they're gone." Avery groaned and stood, pocketing her flashlight. "Impossible. We hung 3 ribbons along the trail yesterday." Marcus flicked on his headlamp. The beam trembled as he swept it across the path's edge. No ribbons, no blazes of paint, nothing but scrub and tree roots swallowed by gloom. A cold knot of panic tightened in their stomachs as they realized they had no clear trail out of the gulch. The map had indicated a single footpath leading back to the forest road. Now that path was invisible. Avery swallowed hard. "Stay calm," she said, though her voice wavered. "We'll retrace our steps." Elena's teeth chattered as she rose. "In this darkness?" she asked. Even Avery knew the answer. The woods were a labyrinth of shadows, and a flashlight's circle was a feeble beacon against the vast unknown. Wyatt clicked off his headlamp. "Let's keep it off," he whispered, ear cocked, "so we don't attract wildlife." The friends exchanged uncertain glances but complied, plunging the world into utter blackness. For a moment, only the creek's tinkle and the thump of their own hearts filled the air. Then the hollow rustle returned, closer this time, as though something large moved just beyond their shallow circle of stillness. Avery drew a deep breath. "All right, we stick together, shoulder to shoulder. Hold hands if we have to." One by one, they formed a trembling line, Avery at the front, Zoe at the rear. They stepped off the soft sand, boots sinking into moss and needles, reaching out to feel the rough bark of trees as tactile guideposts. Every crack of a twig underfoot sounded like a warning. Every brush of wind felt like a whisper urging them deeper into the pines. Heartbeats drummed in their ears as they followed the creek's muted babble, hoping it would lead them to the road. Yet the water's voice grew fainter, blurred by the clap of distant thunder. Lightning flickered overhead, briefly revealing their pale, anxious faces. Eyes wide, limbs tense with every snap of branches. The group pressed onward, sweat mingling with rain as droplets began to spatter through the dense canopy. In that primal blackness, The forest transformed into a place of hidden shapes and shifting phantoms. Zoe stumbled over a gnarled root and fell, her gasp swallowed by the wind. Marcus helped her up, but she shook her head, tears mingling with rain on her cheeks. "We're lost," she whispered, voice trembling. Avery knelt beside her, pressing a hand to her shoulder. "We're not alone," she murmured, a promise and a prayer. Unbeknownst to them, high above, in the ancient firs, a pair of golden eyes observed their plight. Olive, the great horned owl, tilted her head as she watched the flicker of flashlight beams and listened to the disoriented murmur of human voices. In a forest of endless night, she alone could see the scattered movements of the lost campers. With a silent beat of her feathered wings, she prepared to descend into the darkness, to become their midnight guide home. By the time the campers realized they were hopelessly off course, the moon had slipped behind roiling clouds, and the only light came in ghostly flashes of distant lightning. Avery's confident voice, once so steady, now trembled as she fumbled for her compass. Her fingertips were slick with rain, and the glass face of the compass spun dizzily each time she tried to read it. "They're pointing east," Avery said, but her tone lacked conviction. "Which should be toward the road, but I could be upside down." Behind her, Marcus shone his headlamp across the forest floor. Under its narrow beam, knotted roots twisted like serpents, and tangled undergrowth reached out with grasping fingers. Elena shivered and hugged her wet jacket tighter, her teeth chattering in the sudden chill that rose off the damp earth. "Guys," Elena whispered, voice cracking, "I think—" She broke off as a crack of thunder rolled overhead, shaking the treetops and setting the pines swaying in ominous unison. Rain began to pour in earnest, drumming on their hoods and pooling in the hollows of their boots. Wyatt pressed his hand to the underside of his cap, feeling the electric tang that precedes a strike. "We need to stay together," he said firmly, wrapping a hand around Zoe's arm. "If we split up, we'll never find each other." Zoe nodded, eyes wide, as she clutched her water-soaked backpack straps. Avery took a trembling breath. "Okay, here's the plan. We follow the creek upstream. It cuts back toward the road near the old log bridge. I'm sure of it." She pointed into the darkness, where the lazy babble of Silverpine Creek had slipped from a cheerful murmur to a faint, hesitant whisper. They pivoted as one and plunged into the undergrowth. Branches slapped their faces, snagging on jackets and tearing at hair. Marcus led the way, his headlamp beam bobbing across wet trunks and flickering off glistening spiderwebs. Each step was a cautious negotiation around hidden roots and slick stones. Within minutes, their path descended into a shallow ravine where the creek's banks curved beneath moss-draped hemlocks. The water ran dark and swift, carrying leaves and pine needles in tiny swirling eddies. Avery knelt on a wobbly rock, scooping a handful of freezing water to wet her sleeve and confirm the creek's direction. She rose and beckoned them forward. But just as they reached a boulder-strewn crossing, Elena's boots slipped. She cried out as she tumbled into the cold water, backpack skidding free and bobbing like a pale buoy downstream. Marcus lunged to catch her, but the current tugged hard at her legs. Avery dropped her compass and plunged a hand into the rushing current, yanking Elena backward with every ounce of strength she could muster. "I've got you!" Avery yelled above the roar. Elena's teeth chattered as she clung to Avery's arm, and when Marcus hoisted her onto the bank, she collapsed at his feet, water pouring from her hair. Zoe pressed a spare dry shirt into her hands as Wyatt knelt to wring the water out of her socks. "Are you okay?" Zoe asked, voice tight. Elena nodded, too pale to speak, but managed a weak smile. "I'm fine," she croaked, though her lips trembled. Shaken but resolute, the group pressed onward. The creek's steady rush was now a guidepost in the storm's chaos, but the deeper they followed it, the narrower the banks became. Water lapped at their ankles as each scramble between boulders felt more like a tightrope walk. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating their drenched faces in stark white. For a heartbeat, they saw something perched on a mossy ledge, long wings folded, head tilted in silent observation. Zoe blinked. "Did you see that?" she whispered. They spun, headlamps drifting across the gloom, only to find empty rock and rain-slick shadows. The pounding heartbeat of worry echoed in each chest. Minutes stretched into an hour, and fatigue began its slow encroachment. The storm had driven the temperature down, and every soaked layer clung like an icy shroud. Avery's legs burned with muscle ache. Marcus's hands went numb around his flashlight. Elena's teeth rattled with each shuddering breath. Guys, I can't feel my toes, Marcus admitted, kicking off a soaked boot to wriggle his toes in the mud. They're white. Elena dropped to her knees and pressed her palms to his reddening skin. Keep moving, she urged. Don't stop, or hypothermia will set in. But movement only brought new hazards. A hidden root snagged Zoe's foot, and she fell forward into the black muck, slashing her arm on a broken branch. Her cry pierced the storm as she yanked her sleeve away to reveal a bleeding gash. It's bad, she gasped. Wyatt lifted his shelter foil blanket from his pack and wrapped Zoe's arm, applying pressure with a clean bandana Marcus carried. They wrapped her torso in the foil to conserve heat. Zoe's breathing steadied, but the group's spirits sank. Every problem seemed to compound the last. Slipping, injury, numbness. Elena raised her bleeding arm and shook her head. We have to find help. Now. She looked toward the canopy where the pines arched overhead like an unbroken fortress. But I don't trust this path anymore. Avery swallowed, teeth clattering. We can't go back the way we came, she said. We'd never find the campsite in this dark. The creek's voice had dimmed to a trickle. Lightning cracked again, illuminating tangled roots that formed a natural staircase up the ravine wall. Avery pointed. Up there looks like a broken logging trail. It might lead us out. They scrambled toward it, rain washing away trails of blood and footprints in the mud. Branches tore their jackets, and muscles burned with each climb. Lightning revealed a tall figure standing at the trail's crest. Large, silent, head crested with tufts like antlers. They froze, hearts in throats, unsure if relief or fresh terror had come. Then, with a sudden beat of enormous wings, the figure launched into the stormy sky. A single, resonant hoo-ha-hoo echoed through the pines, a sound so full of certainty it cut through their panic like steel. Olive, the great horned owl, soared away, guiding them toward higher ground with every beat of her silent wings. As the friends exchanged awed glances, they realized their panic was over. A midnight sentinel had come to show the way home. As the campers pressed onward through the pitch-black ravine, their panic sharpened by rising winds and unrestful shadows. None noticed the great horned owl that had slipped silently from her daytime roost. High in the ancient hemlocks, Olive perched on a stout limb, her tufted ears and luminous yellow eyes scanning the turmoil below. The wind tousled her mottled feathers, but she remained statuesque, a guardian in the storm's heart. From her lofty vantage, Olive observed the 5 silhouettes clambering over slick stones and clawing at tangled undergrowth. She recognized their plight at once. Lost in the forest, disoriented by the thinning creek's voice, and battered by wind and rain. Each flash of lightning revealed their fear-etched faces, their labored breaths steaming in the chill air. Though smaller creatures skittered in the underbrush and deer fled at the thunder's crack, Olive stayed her ground, waiting for the precise moment to act. Below, Avery stubbed her toe on a submerged rock and cursed softly, her words swallowed by the gale. Marcus's headlamp fell from his slipping cap, spinning in a frantic arc, before landing face down in the mud. Elena's trembling hand searched for her compass, only to find its needle spinning like a toy top. Zoe's ankle throbbed with a sharp pain that her makeshift splint could not quell. Wyatt's voice quavered as he urged them onward, but his words sagged into the shadows, offering little comfort. High above, Olive's keen hearing picked up the subtle rhythm of their footsteps and the hasty drum of their own racing hearts. She opened her bill in a soft, mournful hoo-ha, testing the wind's currents. The gale threatened to carry her call away, so she folded her wings and waited. Lightning split the sky once more, illuminating the forest in stark monochrome. In that flash, Olive's eyes glowed like twin beacons, and for a heartbeat, the campers looked up. "Did you see that?" Zoe gasped, headlamp swinging upward. A silent shape drifted between trunks. An owl, enormous and ghostly, perched for an instant before vanishing again. Avery tightened her grip on Elena's arm. "There, above us," she whispered. Marcus retraced his beam, but only the swaying foliage met his light. Olive seized her chance. She launched into the air with feather-soft grace, talons tucked beneath her body, wings beating in near silence against the storm. She glided down the ravine slope, maintaining a steady altitude above the fragile human line. As she passed over each camper, she dipped her head imperceptibly, guiding them like an arrow toward safety. Each sweeping curve of her flight mapped a path along the skyline, a promise that she would lead them home. Wyatt stumbled over a root, and the owl paused above him, talons gripping the vaporous air. She tilted her head, ruffled her feathers, and let loose a clear, commanding "hoo hoo hoo." The call reverberated through the pines, carrying above the thunder's rumble. It was neither fearsome nor faint, but a precise directive, a guidepost under the indifferent heavens. The campers halted, breathless and transfixed. Avery raised her voice, newfound resolve stiffening her words. "Follow her!" she cried. Elated hope blossomed in Zoe's chest as she reached for Avery's hand. Marcus slung his pack securely and called back to Elena, who nodded with tears in her eyes. Wyatt found his footing once more, and together they lifted their faces to the guiding owl. Olive circled ahead once, then banked toward a faint glow on the ridge above, a single ranch-style house whose yellow window light shone like a lantern in the wilderness. Below, the campers pressed forward, tracing her silent wings through the drenched forest. Fallen cones crackled underfoot, but each step felt surer than the last, as though the owl's presence steadied their resolve and steadied their hearts. Through the dense pines and swirling rain, Olive led them unerringly. With every wing beat, she held the night at bay and carved a path through uncertainty. And as the first hints of dawn tinged the storm clouds with pink, the lost campers emerged onto a muddy lane, soggy boots and all, guided home by the silent sentinel of the sky. The wind's fury began to ebb as Olive rose above the treetops, her broad wings cutting through the misty air with graceful power. Below, the 5 campers, huddled close and hearts pounding, strained their eyes to follow her silhouette against the gauzy moonlight. Each time a cloud scudded past the moon, her outline appeared, a living arrowhead pointing toward promise beyond the pines. Navigating the storm's aftermath, Olive glided toward the east, where the forest floor sloped upward into a narrower ravine. The rain had waned to a drizzle, leaving the ground slippery with oak leaves and slick moss. The creek, once their guiding voice, had dwindled into a shallow trickle. In its place, Olive's flight pattern became their compass. When she dipped low, they crossed a fallen log. When she banked right, they veered around a bramble-choked thicket. Avery led the human column, her pulse still racing but steadier now. She brushed a strand of soaked hair from her eyes. "Keep up the pace, but watch your step," she urged softly. Marcus and Wyatt flanked Elena and Zoe, propping them upright when fatigue threatened their resolve. Each time their boots squelched into mud, they pictured Olive's silent wings above them, a living guide carrying their hopes home. A breeze of guidance. When the trail split into 2 narrow game paths, doubt flickered across their faces. One path sloped sharply downward, but Olive sailed straight above it, talons tucked and head turning back to beckon. Avery pointed. "This way," she said, voice renewed with certainty. The group followed, pressing through ferns that brushed their shoulders and ducking under low-hanging boughs. At one point, a fallen boulder blocked the path. The campers paused, exchanging worried glances. Then Olive swooped low, weaving through a narrow gap between the rock and a leaning pine. Zoe gasped at the sight. It was as if she pointed with precision. Glancing back, Avery nodded to Marcus, who braced his shoulder and pushed aside the smaller stones, carving a narrow passage. They filed through single file, heartened by Olive's silent approval as she soared overhead, wings spread in a proud arc. Crossing the log bridge, soon Olive's flight carried them toward the faint gleam of water reflecting the moon, an old log bridge spanning a side tributary of the creek. The once sturdy logs were slick with rain and moss, rotted in places by years of neglect. Below, foam-flecked water rushed in shadowed currents. A misstep would send a camper into the freezing torrent. Olive alighted on a sturdy pine beside the crossing, head cocked as she watched. She gave a single clear hoo-hoo, as though urging caution. Avery tested the first log with her foot, then extended a hand to Elena. One by one, the campers inching across. Marcus first, balancing his lantern in one hand and reaching for a low-hung branch with the other. Wyatt steadying Zoe's trembling steps. Elena helping Avery sidestep a broken plank. Each heartbeat echoed like a drum, but Olive's watchful presence quelled their nerves. Behind them, Olive lifted off at the last camper's foot, lily-like in her agility, and flew ahead to scout the next obstacle. As they cleared the bridge, Wyatt whispered, "Thank you, Olive." His voice hushed in the night's hush. The owl's reply was a soft "hoo," drifting on the damp air like a benediction. Emergence onto the forest road. Beyond the bridge, the trees thinned, and the air smelled faintly of gasoline and pine solstice candles. In the distance, through a break in trunks, the campers saw the warm glow of their SUV's taillights, abandoned when they'd ventured too far. Relief flooded their chests as Olive performed one final, circling arc above them. She banked to the south, tracing the edge of the forest, where the road lay hidden in shadow. With renewed hope, the group hiked the final few hundred yards, limbs aching but hearts buoyed by rescue's promise. They emerged onto the gravel road just as the first hint of dawn pinked the eastern horizon. At the vehicle's edge, Avery sank to her knees, pressing her hands to her cheeks in astonishment. Marcus and Wyatt slung arms around Elena and Zoe, tears mingling with early morning dew. Olive soared high above the road, catching the rising sun's light on her wings. For a moment her form shone bright against lavender sky, an avian beacon heralding their safety. Then, with one triumphant hoo-hoo, she banked westward and vanished into the thinning mist, leaving the lost campers free to return home, forever indebted to the silent sentinel whose moonlit flight had guided them back from the brink. By the time the first pale fingers of dawn brushed the eastern sky, the five friends stood on the gravel shoulder of Forest Road 17, soaked through to their bones, yet profoundly alive. Behind them, the hemlocks of Silverpine Creek stood as silent sentinels, their dark trunks now softened by morning mist. Above, Olive's form drifted on a gentle thermal, wings outstretched like a living silhouette against the rosy horizon. Reuniting with home, Avery exhaled a shuddering breath, the tension of the night finally releasing from her shoulders. She kicked at a puddle, sending a spray of chill water across her boots, and managed a shaky laugh. "We made it," she whispered, voice trembling with relief. Marcus rubbed his lantern's lens clear of condensation and turned it off, its warm glow no longer needed now that daylight had returned. Wyatt helped Elena to the edge of the road, where a lone patrol truck, summoned by the signaling satellite beacon they'd activated before the storm, rolled into view. Its headlights tracked the campers as they clambered from the ditch, soaked packs slung askew, faces streaked with mud and tears. A uniformed ranger hopped down, umbrella snapping open against the drizzle. "You folks okay?" he asked, voice both gentle and authoritative. Marcus nodded, voice thick. "Thanks to our guide." He looked upward as though Olive might still perch on a roadside sign. Zoe leaned on Wyatt's arm, tears of exhaustion and joy mingling in her eyes. "I thought we'd never see daylight again," she murmured. He squeezed her hand firmly. "We just needed a friend up there," he said, tilting his head toward the dark line of forest behind them, a final salute to the sentinel. With the ranger's help, the group huddled onto the back of the patrol truck's flatbed, out of the road's mud and toward the warmth of the cab. As the engine idled, the friends turned as one to watch the forest's edge. Just beyond where the trees met road, a great horned owl banked into view, talons tucked, head tilted in quiet farewell. Olive circled twice, once for each hour of their perilous journey, then rose into the dawn sky, vanishing into the soft clouds. Avery's voice cracked as she watched. "Thank you, Olive," she whispered into the growing light. Somewhere deep in the pines, the owl's echoing hoo-hoo answered her, a promise that no lost traveler need wander alone, so long as vigilant wings patrolled the night. Reflections on rescue. Back at their campsite, later that morning, the five friends sat around cold embers of their extinguished fire. The SUV's heat pumps hissed welcome warmth as they set cups of coffee, brought by a sympathetic ranger, before each other. No one spoke for several minutes, each wrapped in their own reverie of terror and triumph. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "I've never felt so small," he admitted, stirring cream into his coffee, "and so lucky." Elena reached across and touched his arm. "If we hadn't had Olive up there, guiding us step by step, I don't know." Her voice trailed off, but none needed more words. Avery unfolded the battered map, now creased and stained, and marked the campsite with a bright star. Next to it, she drew a tiny owl silhouette. "Here," she said. Olive stood watch. Wyatt smiled wryly. Best campsite review ever. 1010 would get lost again just to meet the guide. Laughter bubbled around the circle, a healing balm on raw nerves. The story spreads. Word of the miraculous rescue spread quickly once the group returned to civilization. Campus newspapers ran breathless headlines. Lost campers found by forest owl. Local wildlife centers fielded curious calls about golden-eyed guardians. Biologists who studied Olive's territory confirmed her identity, an adult female named for her silent flight and unusual tolerance of human presence. Volunteers set up a modest memorial near the forest's edge, a carved wooden plaque bearing Olive's likeness and the words "In gratitude to our midnight guide." Schoolchildren hiked to the sign each spring, learning to respect both the wildwoods and the creatures that dwell within. A bond that endures. Months later, Avery, Marcus, Elena, Wyatt, and Zoe stood once more on the gentle slope of Hemlock Ridge, not as naive weekend campers, but as a bonded quintet who had faced nature's fury and found companionship in its most unexpected ambassador. They released biodegradable lanterns into the night sky, each glowing orb a silent thanks carried aloft on the same currents that had borne Olive's wings. And when the first star glimmered overhead, they listened, no longer for the babble of a lost creek or the rustle of fearful strangers, but for the soft, reassuring hoo-ha, hoo of a great horned owl patrolling her realm, a midnight sentinel whose moonlit flight had lit the way home.